Well, hello everyone, it has been a while. Adrian back at it again. And this time I'm doing an editing video, taking a little bit of a break from all the traveling and camping and all that good jazz, and just returning back to some of my roots and something that I would love doing with you guys, and that is helping you be as creative as possible. So this time around in this video, what I want to do is talk about color calibration. It has been a tool that I love using ever since I have a better understanding of it, and it has really accelerated and upgraded my editing process from like a basic intermediate level to more of that advanced kind of level, and really get the colors that I want when it comes to my edits. Now, I will say that color calibration is a tool that at first it can be really daunting and just difficult to understand and master and see how it integrates with like the different parts of the editing tools within Lightroom. But here I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. So what you're going to learn from this video is, one, what is color calibration, how to use color calibration, and why do we need color calibration. So here we are in Lightroom right now, and I have this image of my homie Emilio right over here that I took of him in the row in downtown Los Angeles, and I'm effectively going to show you different ways I have edited this image. I've already posted it on Instagram by the time of this video, so that way if you want to go ahead and take a look at that, you can see all the different kind of assortments that I've made by using color calibration. In addition to this video, I'm going to be showing you some specific examples of how I color calibrated some photos. Not going to do a deep dive necessarily, but just at least give you an idea of like what the power of color calibration has in the realm of like portrait photography, as well as just like outside of that as well too. So hopping into this photo right here, let's just start off with the basic definition of color calibration. To start off with the basic definition of color calibration, we got to think about like why color calibration exists, and part of that too is when you think about it in the broad sense, there are so many different types of like gadgets to go ahead and capture photos. We have like our smartphones, we have full body cameras, different camera brands, and different kinds of lenses too. So when it comes to understanding and interpreting color, every one of these brands is going to understand and interpret it colors differently, as crazy as that sounds. So red in like say a Canon brand could mean say red in a different brand itself. That's why when it comes to color calibration and making it in a way consistent, which is going to be the big word here, between multiple different platforms, is why it exists. But in addition to that too, we also got to think about like how we're viewing the colors themselves too. So in terms of capturing it, we also got to think about like, hey, like, am I going to be looking at this photo or like this image through say like a phone screen? Am I going to be looking at it through like a MacBook? Am I going to be looking at it through a Dell? All of these items and electronics come with their different screens, interpret color differently as well. So when you think about it, there's just so much like input and a lot of output, and there can be a lot of inconsistencies between them. That's why color calibration also exists to help us like uniform colors, and also just help them at least the viewer understand them consistently. As from like say the editor's perspective, like whether you're a photographer or like a video editor, you have color calibration to either one, make things more uniform and consistent, or two, just really trying to be as creative as possible with these different types of tools, which I fall into the latter half. At least like with my editing workflow, I like things to make sense, quote unquote. At the same time, I really like pushing my editing skills and saying like, how can I get certain colors to invoke a certain kind of feeling or the like. I'm not gonna get too much into like colors and like feelings and just like how they're interpreted. That's a whole separate conversation in of itself. But with how we have color calibration defined too, let's just go ahead and hop right into like how using color calibration. So I'm just gonna go ahead and hit D on my keyboard, and this is the raw unedited image right over here. Again, like I've posted this image along with the different images that I have pertaining to this one on my Instagram, so if you haven't already, go ahead and check that out. That was really cool, and that was such a fun time shooting. When I saw this at the row, I was like, you know what, we're gonna lock in, we're gonna have a lot of different colors to invoke a lot of different ways, but also draw a lot of inspiration from a lot of the things I like throughout my life. So when I think of color calibration, I think of how do I make my colors more uniform and consistent with each other, so that way I can have less visual noise and also make it really easy to understand what the theme of the image is. Again, this is just one example out of the few that I'm going to be showing you, but this is how I'm going to help illustrate what I mean by that, and also make the definition much more simple. Now when it comes to using the color calibration tool, what you're effectively doing is that you're shifting all these colors to a base color. What do I mean by that? So in the color calibration tool, we have the red primary, green primary, and blue primary, and we have shadows. I'm going to ignore shadows for now and just focus on the red primary, the green primary, and the blue primary. And when we look at our subject over here, our one and only Emilio, I will start to work with the hue slider in the red primary. Hue is denoting like what kind of color it is, as well as saturation denoting like how intense the color it is too. So when I revert things to a certain base color, really everything that includes that color, in this case red, is going to shift over to a certain kind of color or like pattern, or let's say color. If I grab my slider and shift it over to the left, really everything, like the triangles as well as the skin tones, those contain trace amounts of red. And that is helping me move those colors to a certain base color that I can either enhance or I can go ahead and scale back on depending on what kind of look I'm looking for. Conversely, if we go ahead and shift the hue primary, the red hue, over to the right, I'm shifting everything from opposite of like a base magenta color to more of like orangey, kind of like, in a way, it looks like cantaloupe-y like colors in a way. Orangey, yellow, maybe even a little bit of gold. But with this in mind, this is a very, very good example of just seeing how certain colors incorporate other colors and can be used to like as a launching point to now start editing from. At least in this case, when I started editing this photo, to make or break a really good portrait, you got to make sure that the skin tones make sense. What I mean by that, you want to make sure that they're not like super crazy. I'll show some examples later on. You know what, I'll even show an example right now. This is the photo that our one and only Ozzy took of me when we were out in like Half Moon Bay at Dad's Luncheonette. We got some coffee afterwards. Different lighting situations can also mean different ways that a color is produced. That also means how are we going to calibrate those different colors. So for example, if I want to make myself like look a little bit more, have a little bit more of a quote unquote natural color scheme going on, or one that makes sense in this photo, I have to use color calibration to go ahead and set certain parts of my skin tone accordingly, and then marry that with the HSL sliders within Lightroom itself too. A really good thing when working with darker skin tones is that you really want to work with the red primaries as well as the blue primaries itself too. A little bit more of the greens too, depending on like what kind of lighting situation it is. But I find that working with darker skin tones over the course of time, I've had a lot of success with working with the red primaries and blue primaries, and then going ahead and fine-tune and dialing it in with the hue sliders within the color mixer. If you want to learn more about like editing skin tones, go ahead and drop a link, go ahead and drop a comment in the description below. That way I can see what you guys are interested in that too. When I take the blue primary, for example, and I start off with the blue primary, particularly in this context, because at least with my skin tone, I have like traces of like orange in it. If I take the blue primary and really shift it over to the left-hand side, I can really see that my skin tone turns in a way like orangey reddish, and also makes me look like an Oompa Loompa. But at the same time, like I have other colors being affected within here too. So it's not only affecting the colors that have trace amounts of blue in it, but just shifting everything over. So that way, when I look at, say, the color straps over here, I have gone from like, when I hit Control Z, more like bluish toned straps to more teal color straps over here. This is one way, at least with this photo, is how you can go ahead and achieve like an orangey teal kind of look. Obviously it looks way too crazy and I wouldn't post anything like this, but at the same time, working with colors that are already within your image is one way that you can go ahead and basically use color calibration to enhance what's already there, and it makes it easier to set certain colors the way that you want it to be. What I like to do over here is, for one, my objective is to make sure that I get certain colors within the triangles just how I want it to be. At the same time, respect the color tone of my human subject over here too, so that way it makes a little bit more sense. And I'm going to show that with using color calibration in addition to HSL sliders over here too. So we're going to do like a little bit of a live like exercise over here, but it's not going to be complete or perfect. I'm going to show you more of the end results and how I achieve certain colors, and my thought process of like when it comes to setting those colors the way that I want it to. Now, there's a lot of different ways that I wanted to go ahead and edit this photo. I really wanted something where like I had something like very very passionate, very like lively, very bright, very punchy too, while also respecting the skin tones, and also see like what other colors I can go ahead and get here too, which this is also an important point that I want to go ahead and mention before we start editing this photo. When it comes to that previous example of me showing my skin tones, as well as in this current example of showing Amelia right over here, pay attention to how I'm going to basically edit the background of our, behind our human subject. When I went ahead and took the red hue slider over here and shifted everything over, while yes, colors have shifted, particularly the oranges, as well as some traces of like the lighter orange because they have traces of red in it, it doesn't have that too strong of an effect. Conversely, when I take that same slider and move it over to the right hand side, it has made the triangles a little bit more orange over here, and also introduce a little bit more orange within the skin tone itself as well too. Now, there's only so much basically color range that you can go ahead and achieve by using the sliders themselves. You're pretty limited to just either -100 or +100. Let me go ahead and use hue and the red primary slider. Let me take it and push it all the way to -100. That right there is proof that I can achieve a higher color spectrum using color calibration before I even get into HSL itself. -100 on the hue slider within the red primary, I have achieved basically pinks as well as I would say some magentas and dark pinks. It's also affected some of these like purpley triangles over here. I want to go ahead and click on hue again, double click that. It has reverted and I have basically seen a lot of change here and there. You can also use this eye over here and hold it so that way you can see what has exactly changed. But in addition to the triangles themselves changing, I have effectively changed the skin tone of my human subject over here too. So that has basically like not necessarily reintroduced color, but in a way shifted the colors that were already there to a more base form. Now let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum. When I go ahead and grab the slider and push it out all the way towards the right, very similar story and same concept is going on. I'm basically taking all those reds within the image, both within the triangles and the human portrait over here, and shifting them over to more like the orange side. This isn't, so the parts that are unaffected, they're either have very little traces of red, as we can see with like some of the blues over here, or they have like no red at all. I like using color calibration to, one, help set up as a launch point to then effectively work with the different colors that I have within HSL. Let's just go ahead and run that back again. I like going with a little bit of the magenta South Beach kind of vibes over here. Now let me show you how I use that within HSL over here too. Going with my color mixer, now I will go ahead and take that same hue slider and push it out even to the left. By going basically a -100, -100, I have seen and witnessed that now I can achieve a greater ceiling of what kind of colors that I can achieve when I use both of these sliders in tandem with each other. Obviously, you can go ahead and use either +100 too to go ahead and balance out the color, but in a sense, like depending on what kind of stylized look that you're going for, it may either make sense to do that, it may not make sense to do that. And keep in mind, folks, is that there is really not necessarily a wrong way to use color calibration or editing for certain colors within Lightroom. Keep that in mind. What matters is ultimately like what makes sense to your style of edit and what you're going for. I'll even show some examples later down the line too, but this is how you use color calibration in tandem with HSL sliders too. Obviously, you can go ahead and use the saturation over here, so I can even push them out even further to desaturate them to get certain colors I want, so that way other colors within the image can go ahead and stand out. Or I can make it super punchy and also use it in collaboration with saturation too to get, again, a higher ceiling of what kind of colors that I can go ahead and achieve using these different kinds of sliders. And a practice that I would highly encourage you to do is, one, look into sources that you like, what kind of like movies, TV shows, or even like say other kinds of media that you watch that uses very stylized colors. This is all to say that I basically looked into what the end product of the result is, and then reverse engineered and basically tried to copy a style that I really like, and then tweak colors to certain ways to match my editing style, and that way I can put my own like kind of twist or vision onto what I'm editing itself too. Now, this is also to say that, of course, color calibration as a whole is one piece of the whole like puzzle that is within Lightroom, and I'm going to show you a couple examples. And while I'm going to be showing you the values that I have within calibration itself to go ahead and achieve these colors, ultimately I want you to go ahead and shoot out for yourself, so that way you can have a better understanding of like how to use the tool. I feel like reverse engineering from a base goal is going to be one of the best and effective methods, in addition to just learning about it through like the conceptuals and the theory behind it. So starting off with number one over here, when I shot this photo, I had like this one image in mind. I wanted something where I really accentuated some of the oranges, the peachy tones, as well as the bright blue tones, because in LA at the time that we shot, it was like midday. Let's go ahead and hit I on here, because I'm pretty sure it's going to give us all the info that we need. Yeah, it was shot around like high noon, so the sun was directly hanging out overhead at the row. And over here, I have basically a two-color scheme. I have oranges and like a peachy kind of orange over here, as well as some blues that are very much like, I would say, accentuating the different parts of the oranges itself. So basically I have complementary colors going on, but in order to achieve that, I really had to work when it comes to, for one, calibrating the colors, and also working with my color mixer over here, particularly with the red, orange, and yellow channels, because again, in the context of a portrait, you want to make sure that it is both seamless and also respectful of the subject's like color tone within the context of the scene itself. But yeah, for this, I want something like really bright, punchy, and just very like summer-esque. That was what was going through my mind when it came to editing this photo. That's why I edited it in such a style where it's like I have blues to like a lighter color scheme to really go ahead and accentuate and complement each different colors to make something like very summery. Also, the day before this, we saw Andri, and like she played Windy Summer, and it was absolutely fire. So I was like, okay, we're gonna go for something Andri-esque over here. Now, it's basically the same photo, but this time it's a little bit more stylized in the sense that this time around I have the skin tones where they have hints of red within them. It can be really hard to discern that, especially when like you're at a beginner level, or like you're at a level where it's just like you haven't developed that eye over a long period of time. And what my end goal of this was, think of Trolley Sour Bright Crawlers, especially the neon red as well as the blue combination. I think it's like a fruit punch kind of flavor profile. So I was like, okay, let's go for something like this and see how it works out, and also work with the different kinds of tools within Lightroom to go ahead and achieve that. Now, in addition to the other kinds of tools within Lightroom, I didn't talk about tone curve over here, or even the exposure panel. So something to keep in mind is you're going to have a lot of different lighting situations, a lot of different lighting scenarios, and you're going to have to work in different ways to go ahead and work with the same image but produce a different end result. I say that because now when it came to working with the lights of this, I still wanted something really punchy and really summery, but at the same time, like when we look at the data within the exposure panel, I effectively have no shadows whatsoever, and I've dropped the highlights and whites to a very to a negative level, so that way they don't come out too punchy and they're a little bit more restrained in a way. Which reminds me is that when you're starting out, and I have used this technique when I was starting out in color calibration too, punch out a certain color really hard, really like bring it all the way to the left or bring it all the way to the right, and then scale back. It's okay to work a little bit more restrained earlier on when you don't have like say an end goal of like how you want the product to be, or you just don't know how an image is going to work out. And then from there, start to work accordingly with other different kinds of colors within the calibration tool itself, so that way you can have something, at least a foundation of first stylizing your photos before getting to something like really crazy. Because what you're going to find out later on is that like as you incorporate color calibration as well as some of these different HSL tools within Lightroom itself, is that even the littlest interactions or adjustments will have some of the biggest adjustments overall to the image itself. This one image into a series of 10 different images denoting different kinds of like feelings or even kind of like concepts I wanted to work with. So this one, super summery kind of vibe over here. This one I wanted to go with like a truly sour bright color kind of vibe to it. I'll even show you some of the color calibrations that I have to achieve some of these effects too. More like neon, trolley sour bright color. This one right over here, I really thought about nerds, especially like the pink and the purples, to go ahead and create this, and I had to go really crazy with the red primary so that way I can go ahead and respect the skin tones itself too. Additionally, with this one over here, I wanted something like more of like a watermelon kind of vibe to it, and I really thought, you know what, let's go ahead and work with that and work with the different kinds of, say, luminosity values. We're moving on the same thread too. I basically took the same kind of like watermelon concept and made it a little bit darker because I wanted to figure out like, see for myself like how I can push myself as an editor. So while I have the same color calibration over here in the lighter version as well as the darker version, where the magic truly begins is seeing like where the color mixer plays into effect over here too. So I effectively have changed a lot of my luminosity values within the lighter image relative to the darker image over here with the triangles as well as the watermelon theme. And as we can see, like, what I've retained overall with this portrait is seeing how the skin tone is still going to be affected and also respected too. So that way it stays within the realm of, say, like human reality with the alteration of working with the background colors itself. Moving along too, again, very similar to how I interpreted like the nerds one, I wanted to go something a little bit on the darker side, so that's why I also went with something like this too. Working with the different kinds of colors and working how these complementary colors interacted with each other, which to me was like more of like a self-study. Additionally, I went a little bit more with this one, a little bit more punchy, a little bit more vibrant on the like orange and teals itself too, relative to my first iteration, and also made the orange triangles a little bit darker too, and seeing how well the darker colors interacted with the lighter colors itself within the blue. This one over here reminded me a lot of like South Beach. When I bring up South Beach, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this, but you know, when LeBron played for the Miami Heat, he had a full lineup of shoes that were dedicated to like the South Beach colorway. That was something I definitely wanted to replicate within my photos itself too. I think it started with like the LeBron 8 all the way to like the LeBron 11, if I'm not mistaken, but there was an era of shoes where he just had that color scheme, and this is something that I really wanted to incorporate within my photos itself too. Going with like more of a summery kind of theme over here, this time I've really accentuated the oranges to really give itself more of a punch, but instead of going with like a blue or teal kind of color scheme, I had something where I incorporated a little bit more greens, and as we can see when we push the blues and the aquas over that, it had that kind of effect where now the blues and teals were effectively a little bit more on the greener side. Very same thing, I just basically shifted everything from like the greens, from the blues and teals from the green end to the blue end to see how that would work out with this image. But essentially that's all 10 images that I have of Emilio, and as we can see a consistent theme throughout is even though the background has changed quite a lot because of color calibration, the skin tones themselves are relatively consistent and not too crazy to the point where it's like now we're kind of ignoring the human element within the photo. Again, we're just enhancing certain colors within the photo that are already present within the background as well as a person, but at the same time, we're still making it unique and each one individual. Now, I have talked quite a bit about color calibration. I just want to show you a couple more examples before we go ahead and wrap up the video over here too. Moving along to over here, another specific example that I can mention when it comes to working with color calibration is the sky. What I don't like doing when it comes to seeing colors within the sky itself, or like seeing the color blue within the sky itself, is that some cameras will interpret blue as like a little bit of purple or like violet in a way. So there's one crazy example, but I can go ahead and as we can see here, the blue has definitely turned more like a purple or kind of violet, which is not really the case in like a normal day kind of setting. But at the same time, it's only proof that yes, certain colors will incorporate other colors, like purple is made up of like red and blue, hence why when we move over the blue slider to the right hand side, it's going to turn a little bit more purple. I wanted to use the blue primary hue slider in a way where I go ahead and reinsert some more teals into the image, and as we can see, as we go ahead and bring it over to the left hand side, there is quite noticeably much more teal, and at some point it's going to look quite unrealistic, but it depends on which context you're going for. If you want to say a highly stylized photo, yes, this can be acceptable. Otherwise, I like to work with a little bit more restraint and work with more like natural colors in a way. That's why I went with like more of like a 20 or like a 25 in this kind of image over here. Now this is one really good example of using color calibration to get the colors that you want. A very classic color scheme that even I myself have incorporated quite a bit into my editing workflow is going to be teal and blue. Now, when it comes to using teal and blue, a very simple way of doing it is pushing the hue slider within the blue primary a little bit over from the blue side to more the teal side. That way it gives a little bit more of a punch. At the same time, when it comes to like those reds, oranges, or yellows, what I like to do, depending on like what it is I'm going for, as we can see over here, I like pushing the red primary either to the yellows, so that way I have a little bit more of a consistent color theme. I have both complementary colors of the blues as well as oranges and yellows interacting with each other, or I really like to make the individual, like some more individuality depending on what kind of bokeh as well as like light features are going on, especially in nighttime photography. That's why I like pushing sometimes the red primary over to the left hand side and really make those like red dots stand out a little bit more too. So we have this other really crazy example that we can use color calibration in tandem with tone curves itself too. So tone curves in of itself, and why I really suggest learning color calibration first before learning tone curves at times, is when it comes to calibrating your colors, you can achieve teal and orange or like really stylistic shots without learning tone curves. Tone curves itself adds a little bit more precision into what kind of colors that you want in certain areas of the photo. But I tend to find that like when I was starting out and like learning Lightroom from basically 0 to 100 all by myself, I really had to figure out like what my end goal of the product was. Using color calibration in tandem with tone curves over here, I essentially, when it comes to my workflow of how I edit colors, what I always like to do first is figure out like what my end goal is even before I shoot the image, so that way I have a clear-cut example of what I'm shooting out there in the field. Second, I like to work with the exposure panel, so that way I can give certain areas within the image itself either more importance or less importance. At least in this case, because it is a nighttime shot, I went ahead and really like punched out the highlights, so that way I can reduce the amount of both information but also make the image simpler to understand. At the same time, what I like to do is calibrate my colors, can have everything resort to a certain base color, and as that will serve up as a launch pad to how I'm going to edit the rest of the image. Then from here, I go heavy into the color mixer, so that way I can make certain colors either stand out or just blend in with other colors, and then make sure that there's uniformity and consistency throughout. After that, I may add some more color grading. What I like to do with color grading is, at least within this context, is have more of like a global or like a blanket kind of edit and have a certain kind of color uniformly applied throughout the image itself. And then from there, just go into my basics like the detail, lens corrections, and transform. As for the tone curve itself, how that plays into my editing flow, I figure out like what it is I first want to incorporate. Like when it comes to the tone curve itself, do I want to go for like a fade or not? Do I want to have the blacks really crushed, or do I want to have the whites either like grayed out to like a matte kind of finish? And then from there, depending on what kind of colors I need to basically glue everything together, I'll go ahead and insert those colors into there. So at least in this case, I went ahead and add a little bit more teal into both like the shadows as well as blacks, and a little bit more teal into the highlights themselves. And then I added more colors to help balance out the image overall. And as we can see with the blue channel, just go ahead and add a uniform kind of blue to certain parts of, say, the darker portions of the image, as well as blue into the lighter portions of the image too. There are a lot of different ways that I can go ahead and talk about color calibration, how it interacts with each other. If you want to learn a little bit more about color calibration, or just, again, get into a very specific, let me know what it is in the comments below, and I'm happy to help answer those questions. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but I hope that this has served as a very good foundation for you to go ahead and start learning how you can use these tools within each other. And like I mentioned, some of the best ways to learn these tools is go ahead and shoot for yourself. If you have some images that you want to go ahead and share with me and get some feedback on, go ahead and tag me within your Instagram post. Happy to go ahead and provide some of that feedback too, because it's all about getting better together. So with that in mind, my friends, hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next video. If you did like the video, go ahead and give a like as well as subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Peace out.